Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
President Ruto is being slammed, not because he's in the US, but because of how he chose to get there. He decided to fly in a luxury jet. He chartered a Boeing 737-700 business jet from an Emirati company, the Royal Jet Group. He hired it for about 200 million Kenyan shillings. That's $1.5 million US. Ruto pulled out all the stops. He brought along an entourage of more than 30 people, which includes a famous Kenyan comedian. Everyone traveled to the US in style on the Kenyan taxpayers' dime, and this, more than anything else, has triggered the backlash. In the long run, the trip should more than pay for itself. And all of this may be true. And it's exactly what Ruto is using as his defense. But that has not helped quell public anger. Why? Because of Ruto's policies. He's been tough on Kenyan taxpayers. He became president in 2022 and he has been increasing taxes ever since. Ruto has increased the tax rate on salaries. He has doubled the sales tax on fuel. He has introduced a housing levy, a hospital insurance levy, and a turnover tax on small businesses. If it moves, Ruto taxes it. All in the name of fiscal responsibility. Kenya has a mountain of national debt. It was worth over $51 billion as of last December. Ruto had pledged to fix this. That is why he keeps raising taxes. And obviously, this is not a popular move. It puts an added burden on Kenyan citizens who are already struggling with the cost of living crisis and the rising cost of essential food items. In this situation, imagine hearing that your president is flying around in an Emirati jet. The same president who's been raising your taxes, who's been preaching austerity. That same president is taking more than 30 people, including a comedian, to the US. And this is not the first time, apparently. A few months ago, Ruto was dubbed Kenya's flying president. He has been on more than 50 foreign trips since he took office in 2022, more than 3 every month on average.
Now, when looking at this picture, I had to wrestle with myself about what kind of caption it should have. Maybe we should call it Welcome to the Hardware Store, because there's more tools in this picture than you would find at Ace Hardware. By the way, does anyone want to lay bets on whether these guys got together to talk about a right of return for us? Because after all, you got the president of Kenya meeting with the Congressional Black Talkers. I'm sure that was on the agenda, right? Or maybe they were talking about the Africans opening up their country to Black Americans so that we can have mutually beneficial relationships. Get rid of any of these notorious barriers, the tariffs, visa restrictions, and such. Black Americans should be able to get into Africa at no charge whatsoever because we're the only people on the planet not looking to exploit the place. Do you think they were talking about that at all? Maybe someone spared a word or two to talk about the blatant disrespect that Africa's leaders and many of its people show toward Black Americans. Did anyone demand that the president of Kenya renounce that kind of talk? Of course not. The Congressional Black Talkers are nothing more than a pathetic social club, a putrid DC-based cocktail party for wannabe upwardly mobile Negroes, most of whom are immigrants. I gave a rundown on them in a video posted on this very channel. One of these immigrants is Representative Horsford, who Ruto mentions by name in his Twitter tweet. So you got this guy coming over here from Kenya. He's been taxing the country basically into oblivion. But he's not doing without anything. After all, he's got a style and profile for the CBC. You got one gang of crooks talking to another. They deserve each other. And speaking of tweets, the guy actually had the nerve to post, Kenya recognizes the special role that the Congressional Black Caucus continues to play in advancing social justice, human rights, and economic development across the globe. What the hell is that do-nothing gang of bootlicks done for human rights? Oh wait, there was the time they did that sit-in for LGBT persons after a mass shooting. They raised all kinds of hell in the House of Representatives for illegal aliens, but they haven't done anything at all for black people. And by the way, their little do-nothing stunts that they pull for the white media, what exactly did that advance? What did it accomplish? Oh, it got them some headlines, but nothing else. Advancing social justice indeed. Unless you're talking about anything for black people or anything substantive. Advancing human rights? What the hell human rights? What the hell is better in America now than it was in the 1960s on the front of human rights? Economic development? Every single one of those Congressional Black Talkers' congressional districts are the poorest in America. What the hell have they done? He then doubles down on stupid when he posts, Kenya means business. We urge international businesses to capitalize on the 60-year-old Kenya-U.S. relationship that is grounded on shared values of democracy, freedom, and enterprise to invest in Kenya. Now look at how he phrases that. We want you guys to capitalize on the 60-year-old relationship between Kenya and the U.S. so you can invest in Kenya. And when he starts prattling on about shared values of democracy, the United States has never been a democracy for a single moment in its entire existence. But then again, neither has Kenya. That's the place where Barack Obama's father fled from, by the way. Kenya is a kleptocracy. Full stop. And apparently under this guy's leadership, the confiscation of personal wealth from the people has hit an all-time high. It's thieving and robbing and more thieving, mostly by his government. This country, the United States, both its government and the private sector have systematically waged an economic war on black people to shut us out of any and all opportunities to engage in any sort of enterprise. He sounds like a fool heaping all this praise on the Congressional Black Caucus and the United States. Though I do think Kenya and the U.S. do have shared values nonetheless, anti-FBA sentiments being among the first of them. There's no freedom for black Americans, and not much better for Kenyans. An allegedly black president comes to the U.S. but doesn't say a syllable about how black Americans are being treated here. But then again, he's only too jolly in the behind to see if he can finesse himself some cash. Because we know this trip and the lies that he's told weren't about anything other than this Ruto character sweet-talking some white money from the government and certain private interests. That's why he said all this gibberish. We know what his phony praise means, though. He's going to open up the country's mineral deposits to the highest bidder, and as long as those private corporations and the U.S. foreign aid budget gives him a little bit of money for himself, then he'll allow the exploitation to continue as it's been doing for decades. But as we've seen in Niger, the reason that the U.S. gives that little old foreign aid money to these African countries is in order to manipulate them, to get them to play ball with U.S. policy, and to not allow, say, the Russians or the Chinese into their countries. It's the same game of global chess, and the money is how they checkmate their opponents. But the money that the U.S. gives is nothing compared to what they're going to be getting out of it. By the way, while we're on the subject of how much money this guy has blown in the form of his world tour and how much money that he's taking from his own citizens, has anyone bothered to ask what this President Ruto's net worth is, by the way? I'm just asking for a friend. From all accounts that I've found, he's independently wealthy and then some. But practically none of his wealth has made it to the people of Kenya, and his trips to the U.S. are only to benefit the government, which means the crook in chief himself. Keep in mind, this guy gave some sloppy kiss of a eulogy when the former autocrat of Kenya died. That guy was a corrupt bootlick named Mwai Kibaki. And if that name Kibaki sounds faintly familiar to you, it should. About 14 years ago, I made the video that basically changed the narrative about Robert Mugabe, a video called The Truth About Robert Mugabe. And in that video, I talked about how the accusations of brutality that the British leveled against Mugabe were either totally false or at the least nothing compared to what British-approved dictators like Mwai Kibaki did. Kibaki carried out heinous violence in order to force elections to go his way. And the British, they didn't mind at all, because he was playing ball with them. In terms of body counts and repressions, Mugabe was a choir boy compared to Mwai Kibaki, and yet most of you never even heard of his name, because he allowed the British to carry out their exploitation of Kenya without a peep. And then he handed the dagger over to this Ruto character, and it's just more of the same. Now, this guy is over here talking about a good return on investment is guaranteed, especially in our renewable energy, housing, manufacturing, agriculture, and ICT sectors. Does anyone see any part of Kenya that's growing? Anybody see any part of Kenya that's turned into an industrial powerhouse? Me neither. And that's largely because they're being ripped off 5 ways from Sunday. See, this is the problem when you have these policies of not allowing black people from outside of Africa to come in and help develop the place, because that's the same policy that they have for black people in Africa. And that's the reason why you got this do-nothing autocrat who's over here cheesing with the Bootlick Caucus and white power brokers. Because they've been so good for Africa, haven't they? An African leader coming to the United States, waxing poetic about shared values of democracy and freedom and human rights. He does this the exact same week that a coup attempt was made in the Congo, and at least 2 Americans have been arrested in connection with this attack. The Congolese authorities are saying that the leader of that coup, a guy named Christian Malanga, was himself a naturalized American citizen. Christian Malanga came to the U.S. as a so-called refugee, and as soon as he got here, he found the first white woman that he could and started having babies by her, and he decided to have one of his sons join him for this would-be national takeover. Malanga's son, Marcel Malanga, has been living in Utah before he decided to go back to Kenya with his daddy and try to take over the country. Christian Malanga was killed during the coup attempt. And as for his son, the Congolese authorities paraded him in front of the cameras while he was still wearing the outfit and even the assault rifle that he had been using during the failed coup attempt, complete with an American flag on him. The U.S. is of course denying all knowledge of these men and what they did, same way they did with the coup against Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, but Kenya's corrupt president didn't say a word about that. A fellow African nation, almost overthrown by United States citizens, and surely some of the U.S.'s alphabet agencies were behind this. But this African president doesn't say boo about it. See, in the Congo, the U.S. has to get some dirt bags to try to take over that country. But in Kenya, they got him elected to high office. So while the U.S. is actively trying to overthrow governments in Africa, you got this tool coming over here, yucking it up with his fellow sellouts and bootlicks, and telling the same white supremacists who are destabilizing Africa right now that he wants more of them to come over. He's rolling out the red carpet for them. And as for black Americans, crickets. Even for the bootlicks of the CBC, he wasn't inviting any of them over to become citizens of Africa either. No talk about how to build immediate partnerships between Africa and African Americans. Apparently, neither our skill nor our money is green enough for him. And this is why Africa's in the shape it's in. Liars and thieves are in charge, and many of them come over here. And for our soldiers from the diaspora, just understand this is what your leaders do when they come to the U.S. Fraternize with the very enemies that oppress you. You know, even if this Ruto character and the rest of the Kenyan delegation were coming here strictly for their own benefit, I would be somewhat less disgusted if I saw these African misleaders come here, get money, and then use it to make their country's first world success stories. I really wouldn't be able to knock the hustle too much if the hustle was actually empowering the people of Kenya, but it's not. As it stands, it's the worst of both worlds. They come here begging for U.S. foreign aid and private investment, and then the people of Africa are left out, and what little development that does take place is just the same old colonialism and drag. It's very important that for all of the family from outside the U.S. who are watching this, understand it's not some victimless crime when these guys come over here and nobody says boo about it. And it's also not a victimless crime to say nothing when they come here and begin tampering with our internal politics. Ruto knows full well who is behind the coup attempt in the Congo, but he also knows that unless he wants to wind up like Lumumba, he might as well keep his mouth shut. And so he is. He's playing the game, but it's one that the African people always lose. The bootlicks and the CBC have to be shown the door. These people are not for black empowerment at all, and that's going to be the next step of what it is that the grassroots have to focus on. It's time to start taking some ground from the enemy and their minions. These sellouts and tools do not speak for us. And we are getting to the point now where we're just about getting a critical mass of black folks who are able to say it in a voice loud enough to be heard, one that cannot be ignored. And that's the next step here, to put everybody on notice. We're determined to clean house, and we're determined to have our black empowerment. And we're not going to let anyone stand in the way of that, no matter where they come from. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Lorraine Taylor, Jimmy Whitfield, Calvin Bridges, Jabari Robinson, and Ty Banks. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.